They gave my brother $50 million, a Tesla, and a mansion while I got a 5-day spa voucher. I stood there in my discount dress, invisible as always, until a stranger in a gray suit pressed an envelope into my palm. "Your clause matured," he whispered. "It's time." As I opened it in front of 200 guests, the room went silent. Inside was proof that the invisible daughter had just become the majority shareholder. "My name is Claire Delaney, and I've been invisible for 28 years. The chandeliers in my father's Nashville mansion cast shadows that seemed designed to hide people like me, the disappointments, the afterthoughts, the ones who graduated from state schools instead of Stanford. I stood near the marble column in the grand ballroom, holding a glass of champagne I hadn't touched, watching my family's carefully choreographed performance of wealth and success. "Ladies and gentlemen," my father's voice boomed through the microphone, his Tennessee drawl polished by decades of board meetings. "Thank you all for joining us on this momentous occasion." I knew what was coming. I'd known for weeks, ever since I'd accidentally seen the email on his assistant's screen. The great Robert Delaney was about to crown his prince. My brother Logan stood beside him, all 6 feet of Silicon Valley success wrapped in a Tom Ford suit, fresh from his product management role at Google. He radiated the kind of confidence that comes from never having to prove you deserve your place in the world. His Stanford MBA might as well have been tattooed on his forehead. "As you all know," my father continued, "Delaney Holdings has grown from a small trucking company to a logistics empire worth over $150 million. The crowd murmured appreciatively. I shifted my weight, feeling my feet ache in the sensible pumps I'd worn, the same ones I wore to the office every day, where I worked in the operations department, handling contracts and vendor relationships that nobody else wanted to touch. And today, I'm proud to announce that I'm passing the torch to the next generation." My mother, resplendent in Oscar de la Renta, dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. Pure theater. She'd been planning this moment since Logan was accepted to Stanford. Logan Delaney will be receiving 25% ownership of Delaney Holdings, along with a position on the board of directors. The applause was thunderous. I clapped too. Muscle memory from a lifetime of celebrating Logan's achievements. Honor roll, valedictorian, full scholarship, Google offer. Each milestone another reminder of what I wasn't. "But that's not all," my father said, grinning. "We're also gifting him the keys to a new Tesla Model X and the penthouse in downtown Nashville's newest luxury tower." More applause. Logan hugged our father, then our mother. His girlfriend, a venture capitalist's daughter he'd met at a tech conference, kissed his cheek. And of course, my father's eyes swept the room until they found me. "We haven't forgotten our Claire." The spotlight swung toward me, harsh and unexpected. 200 faces turned to stare at the forgotten daughter. Claire will be receiving a 5-day spa package at the Breakers in Palm Beach. The applause was polite, confused, a spa package. After Logan's millions, I smiled. It was the same smile I'd perfected at 8 years old when Logan got the bigger Christmas present. The same smile I wore at 16 when my parents missed my high school graduation because Logan was giving his valedictorian speech at his prep school. The same smile that had carried me through 7 years of working 60-hour weeks at my father's company, saving him millions through contract negotiations he never knew about. That's when I felt the hand on my elbow. A man in a gray suit stood beside me, someone I'd never seen before. He was perhaps 60, with silver hair and the kind of face that was professionally forgettable. He leaned close, his breath smelling faintly of mint. "Your clause matured," he whispered, pressing a thick envelope into my hand. "It's time." Before I could respond, he melted back into the crowd. The envelope felt heavy, substantial. Through the paper, I could feel the sharp edges of documents. "Let's raise a toast," my father was saying, "to the future of Delaney Holdings." Glasses rose around the room. Mine stayed low. Forgotten. As my fingers traced the edge of the envelope. 7 years ago, I'd written something, added something, a tiny modification to a routine contract update that I'd been tasked with during a corporate restructuring. The clause. I remembered it now with perfect clarity. The late night in the office, the stack of documents that needed updating. Appendix C, Ownership Distribution for Non-Equity Family Staff. Such a boring title for what would become my salvation. Speech, someone called out, and Logan took the microphone. I'm humbled by this opportunity, he began, and I almost laughed. Logan had never been humble a day in his life. I promised to take Delaney Holdings into the future with innovation and strategic thinking learned from the best minds in Silicon Valley. My thumb slipped under the envelope's seal. Inside, I could see the edge of a legal document, the kind printed on expensive paper that law firms used for only the most important matters. The invisible daughter was about to become very, very visible. The envelope burned in my hand as Logan continued his speech, but my mind drifted back through the years, through all the moments that had led to this one. I was 5 when I first understood I was different from Logan. He was 7, and our mother had just framed his finger painting to hang in the living room. When I proudly presented my own artwork, a carefully colored butterfly, she'd patted my head and suggested we keep it in my room where it would be special. By the time I was 10, the pattern was clear. Logan's report cards went on the refrigerator. Mine went in the filing cabinet. Logan's soccer trophies lined the mantel. My piano recital certificate stayed in my bedroom drawer. It wasn't cruelty, exactly. It was something worse in difference. Claire's our steady one, my mother would tell her friends at the country club. Not brilliant like Logan, of course, but reliable. Reliable. That word followed me like a shadow. When Logan was accepted to Stanford, I was accepted to Middle Tennessee State. When he interned at McKinsey, I worked at a local accounting firm. When he graduated summa cum laude, I graduated quietly. My parents too busy flying out to California to attend my ceremony. But it was at 15 that I discovered my real talent. The one nobody noticed because it wasn't flashy enough for the Delaney family standards. I'd been helping in my father's home office, another invisible task for the invisible daughter, when I noticed a discrepancy in one of his supplier contracts. A small thing, really, a pricing structure that didn't account for fuel surcharges, costing the company thousands each month. I'd quietly pointed it out to his assistant, who'd fixed it without fanfare. Nobody knew it was me. That's when I realized I could see patterns in numbers that others missed. I could spot the loose threads in contracts that, when pulled, revealed entire tapestries of inefficiency. But in a family that valued Harvard MBAs and Silicon Valley connections, being good with contracts was like being good at organizing closets useful, but not impressive. When I turned 21 and took the job at Delaney Holdings, I was given a desk in the operations department, 3 floors below the executive suite where my father ruled his empire. Start from the bottom, he'd said, as if Logan hadn't started with an executive training program and a mentor from the board. But the bottom was exactly where I needed to be. That's where the real work happened, where contracts were actually read instead of just signed, where vendors revealed their true colors, where the foundation of the company either held firm or showed its cracks. Within 6 months, I'd identified a dozen contracts bleeding money. Within a year, I'd renegotiated terms that saved the company $2 million. By year 3, I'd built a reputation among the operations staff as the one who could fix anything, find anything, solve anything. The $12 million lawsuit came in my 4th year. A supplier claimed breach of contract, seeking damages that would have crippled us. The legal department was in panic mode. My father had hired outside counsel from New York. I'd spent 3 sleepless nights in the archives, going through 7 years of correspondence, invoices, and delivery confirmations. And there it was buried in subsection 47B of the original agreement, a clause about force majeure that the supplier had triggered themselves by failing to maintain their insurance bonds. I'd quietly passed my findings to the legal team. The case was dismissed. My father celebrated with champagne and bonuses for the lawyers. I went back to my desk on the 3rd floor. But I was learning. Every contract I touched, every negotiation I witnessed, every legal maneuver I absorbed it all. I wasn't building a resume like Logan. I was building something else understanding. Real, deep, practical knowledge of how the company actually worked, where its power came from, where its weaknesses hid. The restructuring came in my 5th year. Delaney Holdings was expanding, bringing on new investors, updating its corporate structure. The legal department was overwhelmed. They needed someone to handle the routine updates to internal documents. Naturally, they'd given it to me. I'd spent weeks in a conference room surrounded by boxes of documents, making minor updates to reflect the new corporate structure. Mind-numbing work for anyone else. For me, it was an education in corporate governance that no MBA program could match. That's when I'd founded Appendix C of the corporate bylaws, ownership distribution for non-equity family staff, a document so boring, so administrative, that it had probably never been properly reviewed. It dealt with stock options and ownership rights for family members who worked in non-executive positions. And that's when I'd seen my opportunity. Not for revenge, I wasn't that person then. Just for fairness, for recognition, for the chance that maybe, someday, the invisible work might become visible. So I'd added a clause, nothing dramatic, nothing that would trigger red flags, just a small provision about ownership rights for family members who contributed substantial operational value over a period of 10 years. A performance-based equity assignment that would activate when specific financial milestones were met. I'd been careful with the language, using the same dry legal prose that made these documents unreadable to anyone who wasn't paid to care. I'd buried it in subsections and cross-references, but it was all there, all perfectly legal. My father had signed it without reading, just as I'd known he would. The chief legal counsel had signed it because it came from internal updates. The CFO had signed it because it was part of a 100-document restructuring package. And then I'd waited. 7 years. 7 years of watching Logan collect accolades for strategic thinking, while I'd saved the company millions through tactical execution. 7 years of spa days and token bonuses while Logan got stock options and board positions. 7 years of being reliable, steady, invisible Claire. But I'd kept records. Every contract I'd negotiated, every crisis I'd solved, every dollar I'd saved, all documented, all filed, all waiting. The milestones had been met last quarter. $30 million in profit for 3 consecutive years, and my 10 years were up next month. The man in the gray suit, I knew who he was now. The lawyer I'd consulted privately, the one who'd reviewed my clause and confirmed its validity, who'd been monitoring the company's financials and waiting for the moment of maturation. Logan was wrapping up his speech now. Something about bringing disruptive innovation to a logistics company that moved trucks and packages. The room was applauding again. I looked down at the envelope in my hands and smiled. Not the practiced smile of the invisible daughter, but something new, something real. The steady one was about to become the majority shareholder. The weight of what I'd done, what I was about to do, settled over me as Logan stepped down from the microphone. 7 years ago. I hadn't planned this moment. I'd simply wanted protection, recognition, something that acknowledged my existence beyond being Logan's lesser sister. But as I stood there with the envelope in my hand, I realized I'd built something far more powerful than a safety net. I'd built a trap, and my family had walked right into it. The specific memory of that night came back with crystalline clarity. October 15th, 7 years ago. The office had been empty except for me and the overnight security guard. I'd been tasked with updating what Monica from legal had called housekeeping documents, the kind of mindless work that partners at law firms billed at $500 an hour, but dumped on internal staff whenever possible. Appendix C had been a standard template about family employment rights. Most corporations had them. Boilerplate language designed to prevent lawsuits from disgruntled relatives who felt they deserved more. But as I'd read through it, I'd seen something else: opportunity. The document already contained provisions for family members in operational roles. All I'd done was expand the definition slightly. Where it had said, may be eligible for discretionary bonuses, I'd added, and performance-based equity redistribution according to measurable contribution metrics as defined in Schedule J7. Then I'd created Schedule J7. It was a masterpiece of bureaucratic precision. 3 pages of formulas and conditions that would make any executive's eyes glaze over. But at its heart was a simple principle: if a non-executive family member could demonstrate they generated or saved the company at least $50 million over a 10-year period. And if the company met certain profit thresholds, that family member would automatically receive equity shares proportional to their contribution. The beauty was in the mathematics. I'd used the company's own valuation formulas, the ones they used for executive compensation. By those metrics, my documented contributions, the saved lawsuit, the renegotiated contracts, the prevented losses totaled nearly $70 million. The formula, when applied, yielded 32%. I'd been meticulous about the documentation. Every email saved, every contract logged, every dollar accounted for. I'd even created a shadow system, sending copies of important documents to a private server, building what amounted to a parallel record of my work. The profit thresholds had seemed impossible at the time. $30 million in net profit for 3 consecutive years. Delaney Holdings had never hit those numbers. But I'd known something the executives didn't. The inefficiencies I was fixing would compound over time. The contracts I was negotiating would yield increasing returns. The systems I was implementing would scale. My father had signed it on a Thursday afternoon, part of a stack of documents his assistant had marked with sticky notes. Sign here, initial here. He'd been on a conference call, discussing the acquisition of a smaller competitor. The CFO, Harold Morrison, had signed it the next day. He'd been 2 years from retirement, more concerned with his golf game than with subsection updates. The chief legal counsel, Patricia Vance, had signed it after a cursory review, probably assuming that anything from internal operations was routine. None of them had read Schedule J7. But Thomas Ashford had. The gray-suited man who'd handed me the envelope was Nashville's most discreet corporate attorney, the kind lawyers hired when they needed their own lawyer. I'd found him 3 years into my plan, when I'd realized I needed someone to validate what I'd built. This is either brilliant or insane, he'd told me after reviewing everything. But it's legal, completely, unquestionably legal. He'd charged me a consultation fee that had eaten up 6 months of my savings, but he'd also given me something invaluable: confirmation, and a promise to monitor the situation, to let me know when the conditions were met. The monitoring had been crucial. I'd needed someone outside the company to track the profit thresholds, someone who could provide independent verification. Thomas had quarterly reports prepared by a third-party accounting firm, all perfectly legitimate, all building a paper trail that would be unassailable. The 10-year mark was harder to game. It simply required patience. But I'd started young, taking the job at 21. Next month, I'd turn 31. The math was simple, inevitable. What I hadn't anticipated was how the waiting would change me. 7 years of keeping the secret had been its own kind of education. I'd learned to navigate corporate politics without seeming political. I'd built relationships with key employees without appearing to network. I'd become indispensable without anyone noticing they depended on me. The suppliers loved me because I paid attention to their concerns and found win-win solutions. The warehouse managers trusted me because I understood their operations and never made unrealistic demands. The accounting department relied on me because my contracts were clean, clear, and never caused problems downstream. I'd become the person everyone called when something went wrong, the fixer who worked in the shadows, and I'd documented every fix, every save, every crisis averted. The $12 million lawsuit had been the headline number, but there had been so many others. The contract error that would have cost us $3 million. The supplier relationship I'd salvaged that kept $4 million in annual revenue. The new vendor terms I'd negotiated that saved $600,000 per quarter. Small victories that added up to an avalanche. My father never knew. Why would he? The wins were reported as team efforts, departmental successes. I made sure my bosses looked good, and they were happy to let me keep working my quiet magic. Logan, home for holidays, would regale us with tales of Silicon Valley disruption while I sat quietly, knowing I'd saved the company more that quarter than his entire Google salary. But the real revolution had been internal. Somewhere along the way, I'd stopped wanting recognition. I'd stopped needing my family's approval. The work itself had become my validation. the secret had become my strength. Now, standing in that ballroom with 200 of Nashville's elite watching my brother bask in his coronation, I felt something I hadn't expected: calm. This wasn't revenge. This was simply the conclusion of a very long contract negotiation. My phone buzzed. A text from Thomas Ashford. Third-party verification complete. All conditions met as of last Tuesday. Documents notarized and filed. The clause is fully matured and legally enforceable. I looked up at my family. My father was shaking hands with his golf buddies. My mother was posing for photos with her garden club friends. Logan was surrounded by admirers, already playing the part of heir apparent. None of them knew that the invisible daughter had just become the largest individual shareholder of Delaney Holdings. None of them knew that every signature on that forgotten document had been legally binding. None of them knew that Schedule J7 was about to change everything. The envelope in my hand contained the proof: copies of the original appendix, the authenticated signatures, the third-party valuations of my contributions, the profit threshold confirmations, the legal opinion from one of Tennessee's most respected firms. 32%, more than Logan's 25%, more than any other family member, enough to demand a board seat, enough to block major decisions, enough to finally be seen. I thought about the girl who'd colored that butterfly at age 5, who'd practiced piano in an empty house, who'd graduated to sparse applause. She would have cried at this moment. She would have felt vindicated. But I wasn't her anymore. The 7 years had transformed me into someone else, someone who understood that power wasn't given. It was built, documented, notarized, and executed with perfect timing. The orchestra was starting up again. The party was moving into its next phase. Champagne flowed. Laughter echoed off the marble floors. And I stood there with my envelope, waiting for the right moment to open it. Waiting to show them what the steady one had been building all along. The country club's ballroom gleamed with old money elegance. Crystal chandeliers cast prismatic light across the marble floors, while a string quartet played Mozart in the corner. This was my father's element, the carefully curated world where handshakes were worth millions and your last name was currency. Before we continue with the celebration, my father's voice boomed through the microphone again. I want to thank everyone for being here to witness this historic moment for Delaney Holdings. I moved closer to the center of the room, still clutching the envelope. A few people noticed me walking forward, probably wondering why the forgotten daughter was stepping into the spotlight. I caught my reflection in one of the gilt-framed mirrors, navy dress from Target, sensible shoes, minimal jewelry. Next to the designer gowns and Cartier watches, I looked like staff. The future of American business lies in innovation, my father continued, clearly building up to another toast. And with Logan's experience at Google, his Stanford education, and his fresh perspective, Delaney Holdings will evolve from a traditional logistics company into a technology-driven powerhouse. Scattered applause. I was close enough now to see the satisfaction on my father's face, the pride in my mother's eyes. Logan stood straighter, already inhabiting his new role. So please, my father raised his champagne flute, join me in toasting not just to Logan, but to the future of... Excuse me. My voice cut through the room like a blade through silk. 200 heads turned. The string quartet faltered, then stopped. My father's smile froze. Claire, sweetheart, we'll have time for speeches later. No, Dad, I think now is perfect. I held up the envelope. Since we're discussing the future of Delaney Holdings, there's something everyone should know. Logan stepped forward. Claire, what are you doing? I ignored him, focusing on my father, the man who'd built an empire but never noticed the daughter helping to hold it together. 7 years ago, during the corporate restructuring, I was asked to update some internal documents, standard housekeeping, nothing important. I paused, letting the words sink in. One of those documents was Appendix C of the corporate bylaws, dealing with ownership distribution for non-equity family staff. My father's face had gone from confused to wary. Claire, this is hardly the time. You signed it, Dad, October 15th, 2017. You were on a call about the Riverside acquisition. I opened the envelope, pulling out the first document. So did Harold Morrison, your CFO, and Patricia Vance, your chief legal counsel. The room was silent now, the kind of silence that precedes earthquakes. The appendix contained a provision, I continued, my voice steady despite the hammering of my heart. Schedule J7, a performance-based equity redistribution clause for family members who could demonstrate substantial value creation over a 10-year period. My mother stepped forward, her face pale beneath her perfect makeup. Claire, what are you talking about? I pulled out the second document. According to Schedule J7, if a family member in a non-executive role generates or saves the company at least $50 million over 10 years, and if the company achieves net profits of $30 million for 3 consecutive years, that family member automatically receives equity shares proportional to their contribution. Logan laughed, but it sounded forced. That's ridiculous. No one would sign something like that. Page 47, I said, holding up the document. Dad's signature, right there. And here. I pulled out another page. The third-party verification from Brennan and Associates, certified public accountants. My documented contributions to Delaney Holdings over the past 10 years total $72 million. The murmur started then, low and uncertain, rippling through the crowd like wind through wheat. This is absurd, my father said, but his voice had lost its commanding tone. You're a mid-level operations manager. How could you possibly— The Meridian lawsuit, I interrupted. $12 million saved when I found the force majeure clause. The Fuel Max contract renegotiations, $600,000 saved per quarter for 5 years. The Brighton supplier issue that would have cost us $3 million. The Patterson relationship I salvaged $4 million in annual revenue retained. I pulled out more papers. It's all here. Every email, every contract, every dollar, documented, verified, notarized. Thomas Ashford chose that moment to step forward from the crowd. I hadn't seen him arrive, but his timing was perfect. Robert, he said, his voice carrying the authority of 40 years in corporate law. I've reviewed all of Miss Delaney's documentation. The clause is valid and binding. The conditions have been met. My father's face went from pale to red. Tom, you're involved in this. I'm simply confirming the legal status of a signed agreement, Ashford replied calmly. According to the formula in Schedule J7, based on Miss Delaney's verified contributions and the current company valuation, she is entitled to 32% of Delaney Holdings. The room erupted. 32%, someone gasped. More than Logan. Is that even legal? I stood in the eye of the storm, calm washing over me. This wasn't chaos. This was clarity. You tricked me, my father snarled, stepping toward me. You snuck this into the documents. I enhanced a standard provision to ensure fair compensation for value creation, I replied evenly. You signed it. You had lawyers. You had time to review. You chose not to read it. This won't stand, Logan said, his Silicon Valley confidence cracking. We'll challenge it. No court would uphold something so obviously fraudulent, Ashford interrupted. There's no fraud here. Unusual, yes, but completely legal. Miss Delaney didn't hide anything. The provision was there in black and white. Your father's signature is authentic. The conditions are objective and have been met. Any court in Tennessee would uphold this. I looked around the room, seeing the faces of Nashville's business elite people who understood contracts, who respected legal agreements, who knew that the foundation of commerce was honoring your signature. I've spent 10 years in the operations department, I said, addressing the room now. 10 years making sure your shipments arrived on time, your contracts were profitable, your problems were solved before they became crises. I did it without an MBA, without a trust fund, without a seat at the leadership table. I did it because the work mattered. My mother sank into a chair, one hand pressed to her throat. But apparently, I continued, the only language this family understands is ownership. So here it is, 32%, the largest individual stake in Delaney Holdings. You're not qualified, my father said desperately. You don't have the education, the experience. I have 10 years of experience running the actual operations of this company, I shot back. I have relationships with every major supplier. I have the trust of the warehouse managers, the drivers, the dock workers, the people who actually move the products that generate the profits you're so proud of. I turned to Logan. You want to bring disruption. I've been disrupting inefficiency for a decade. You want to innovate. I've been innovating solutions to problems you don't even know exist. The crowd was watching like spectators at a tennis match, heads swiveling between us. This is still my company, my father said, but the words lacked conviction. No, I corrected. It's our company, and as the largest individual shareholder, I'll be expecting a seat on the board. We have a lot to discuss about the future direction of Delaney Holdings. I pulled out the final document from the envelope. Oh, and one more thing. According to the corporate bylaws, the same ones you signed, any shareholder with more than 30% ownership can call for a comprehensive operational audit. My father's face went white again. I'm calling for that audit, effective immediately. I think it's time we took a thorough look at how this company has been run. I smiled, and this time it wasn't practiced. After all, if we're going to move forward as partners, we should start with complete transparency. The silence that followed was deafening. My family's carefully constructed kingdom had just experienced its first successful coup, and the revolutionary was wearing sensible shoes from Target. Congratulations on your 25%. Logan, I said, raising my untouched champagne glass. I look forward to working with you. Then I turned and walked toward the exit, leaving chaos in my wake. Behind me, voices rose angry, confused, incredulous, but I didn't stop. I'd said what I came to say. The invisible daughter had just become impossible to ignore. The sound of my heels on marble echoed through the country club's hallway as I walked away from the ballroom. Behind me, the chaos crescendoed, voices raised in argument, chairs scraping against floors, the distinctive crash of what was probably a champagne flute meeting tile. I didn't turn around. My phone buzzed incessantly. 14 missed calls already. I silenced it without looking. The valet brought my car, a 6-year-old Honda Accord that looked almost embarrassing next to the line of Mercedes and BMWs, but it was paid for, reliable, and mine. Everything I had was earned, not given. I had barely pulled out of the parking lot when I saw him in my rearview mirror. Logan, running in his Tom Ford suit, waving frantically. Against my better judgment, I stopped. He yanked open the passenger door and collapsed into the seat, breathing hard. Jesus, Claire, what the hell just happened? You got 25% of a $150 million company, I said, pulling back into traffic, plus a Tesla and a penthouse. Congratulations. Don't, he turned to face me, and for the first time in years, I saw something other than smugness in his expression. I mean it. What just happened back there? I navigated through downtown Nashville's evening traffic, considering my words. What happened is that I finally got tired of being invisible. 32% Claire. That's impossible. Apparently not. You planned this for 7 years. I protected myself. There's a difference. Logan was quiet for a moment, staring out at the city lights. The Meridian lawsuit that was you. Yes. And the Fuel Max negotiations. Also me? Christ, he rubbed his face. I gave a presentation to the board about our operational excellence last quarter. Dad said it was because of our leadership vision. It was because I spent 6 months rebuilding our vendor relationships after the Patterson fiasco. I didn't even know there was a Patterson fiasco. That's because I fixed it before it became one. We drove in silence for several blocks. I was heading toward my apartment in East Nashville, a renovated duplex in a neighborhood that was up and coming, according to real estate agents, and sketchy according to my mother. They're losing their minds back there, Logan said finally. Dad's threatening to call every lawyer in Tennessee. Mom actually fainted, genuinely fainted. Had to call the club doctor. She'll be fine. She's fainted at 3 charity galas in the last 2 years. It's her go-to move when she needs to change the narrative. Logan laughed, short and sharp. God, You really have been paying attention. I've been doing a lot more than that. Yeah, I'm starting to get that. He turned to me again. Claire, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest. Did you do this to destroy me? I pulled into my driveway and turned off the engine. In the dim light from the street lamp, my brother looked younger than his 29 years, vulnerable in a way I hadn't seen since we were children. No, I said simply. This was never about you, Logan. It was about me, about making sure that when Dad finally decided to carve up his empire, I wouldn't be left with crumbs. A spa weekend, he said, and actually winced. God, that's insulting. It's what I'm worth to them. Was worth, I corrected myself. Things are different now. 32% different, he shook his head. You're the largest shareholder, larger than Dad. Individual shareholder. Dad still has 40%. And I have 25. Mom has 3. He was doing the math. You could block any major decision. You and anyone else could outvote Dad. Theoretically. Jesus, Claire. He looked at me with something approaching respect. You didn't just protect yourself. You positioned yourself. My phone rang. Dad's ringtone. I declined the call. You should probably head back, I said. They'll be looking for you. In a minute, Logan shifted in his seat. I need to tell you something. When I was at Google, I worked on a supply chain optimization project. We were analyzing different companies, looking for inefficiencies. Delaney Holdings came up. I waited. Our models showed that someone in the company was consistently making decisions that improved efficiency by about 4% annually. Compound that over several years, and it was significant. My manager wanted to know who it was. Said we should try to poach them. What did you say? I said it was probably a team effort, multiple people, because I couldn't imagine one person having that kind of impact without being in senior leadership. He laughed bitterly. It was you, wasn't it? The whole time. It was you. I was just doing my job. No, you were doing everyone's job, better than they were. He opened the car door, then paused. That audit you called for. You're going to find things, aren't you? I met his eyes. Logan, I've been in the operations trenches for 10 years. I know where every inefficiency is buried. I know which contracts are bleeding money. I know which executives are taking credit for other people's work. I paused. And I know which board members have been approving expenditures that benefit their other business interests. His face paled. Dad's golf buddy partnerships. Among other things. Holy shit, Claire, you're not just taking a seat at the table. You're flipping the entire table over. No, I'm setting it properly, for the first time. Logan got out of the car, then leaned back in. You know Mom and Dad are never going to forgive you for this. They were never going to see me anyway. At least now they have to acknowledge I exist. That's not... Claire, is that really what you think? That they don't see you? I thought about every overlooked achievement, every dismissed suggestion, every family dinner where Logan's stories dominated while my days went unasked about, when's my birthday, Logan? What? My birthday. When is it? He opened his mouth, then closed it. The silence stretched. March 15th, I said finally. Our parents forgot it 3 years in a row when you were at Stanford. You've never once remembered it without Facebook reminding you. Claire. Go back to the party. Logan, go manage the crisis. That's what future executives do, right? He stood on my modest driveway, looking lost in his expensive suit. What happens now? Now I become the board member Delaney Holdings needs. Someone who actually understands how the company runs. Someone who's earned their seat. I started the engine again. I'll see you at the next board meeting. Claire, wait. He gripped the door. That provision you wrote. Schedule J7. Were there others like you? Other employees who could qualify? I smiled. Why don't you read the full document and find out? After all, you're an owner now. Might be good to know what you actually own. His face went through several expressions before settling on something like admiration mixed with fear. You're going to change everything, aren't you? Everything that needs changing. And if I oppose you, Then oppose me with facts and logic and better ideas, not with privilege and connections and last names. I put the car in reverse. That's the company I'm building. You can be part of it or not. Your choice. Logan stepped back, and I watched him in my rearview mirror as I backed out, standing in my driveway in his designer suit, finally understanding that his little sister hadn't just grown up. She'd grown powerful. My phone had 37 missed calls by the time I got inside my apartment. I poured myself a glass of wine, the good stuff I'd been saving for a special occasion, and sat on my second-hand couch in my modest living room. Tomorrow, the real work would begin. Lawyers would be called. Challenges would be mounted. The full weight of my family's influence would come crashing down. But tonight, in my small apartment with its thrift store furniture and its walls lined with the business books I'd studied while Logan was at parties, I raised my glass to the invisible daughter who'd refused to disappear. Schedule J7 was just the beginning. I stood at the podium where my father had been just moments before, the microphone still warm from his grip. The ballroom had erupted into chaos after Logan's departure. Board members huddled in corners making frantic phone calls, my mother being fanned by her garden club friends, my father pacing near the bar with 3 lawyers who'd been guests but were now earning their retainers. "If I could have everyone's attention," I said into the microphone. My voice carried clearly through the speakers, cutting through the pandemonium. The room didn't quiet immediately. I waited, patient as I'd learned to be through countless operations meetings where executives talked over me. Gradually, the noise died down. 200 faces turned toward me, some curious, some hostile, most simply shocked. "I understand this evening has taken an unexpected turn," I continued. "But since we're all here to celebrate transitions in leadership at Delaney Holdings, I thought we should discuss what that really means." "You have no right to that microphone," my father called out, his face flushed with anger and champagne. "Actually, I do." I pulled out another document from the envelope I'd come prepared with copies. "As the largest individual shareholder, I have every right to address other stakeholders. Page 93 of the corporate bylaws, the ones you wrote. Dad." Thomas Ashford nodded slightly from his position near the wall, confirming my citation. "For those of you who don't know me," I continued, "I'm Claire Delaney. I've worked in operations at Delaney Holdings for 10 years. You've probably never noticed me at corporate events because I was usually solving problems instead of attending them." A few people chuckled nervously. I recognized some faces from the operations side: warehouse managers, logistics coordinators, people who actually knew my work. 32%, someone called out. "How is that possible?" "It's possible because value creation isn't always visible from the executive suite," I replied. "While the leadership team was focused on acquisitions and expansions, I was ensuring our existing operations actually functioned profitably." I clicked a button on my phone, and the ballroom's projection screen came to life. I'd arranged this with the AV team earlier, telling them it was for a celebration video. Instead, a simple graph appeared. "This shows Delaney Holdings' operational efficiency over the past decade. Note the steady improvement starting 7 years ago. 4% annual gains, compounding." I clicked again. "This shows our contract dispute settlements. Notice how they dropped by 80% over the same period. And this," another click, "shows our supplier retention rate, which went from 60% to 95%. "What's your point?" one of the board members demanded. "My point is that someone was doing this work. Someone was making these improvements. Someone was saving this company millions of dollars annually." I looked directly at my father. "And according to Schedule J7 that someone has earned their equity." My mother stood up, swaying slightly. "Claire, sweetheart, you're embarrassing yourself. And us, please." Embarrassing. I let the word hang in the air. Was it embarrassing when I spent Christmas 2019 in the office, preventing a supply chain collapse that would have ruined our contracts with 3 major clients? Was it embarrassing when I worked through pneumonia to negotiate the emergency rates during the 2021 fuel crisis? "Nobody asked you to," my father started. "No one had to ask. I did it because it needed doing, because I actually care about this company beyond what it can buy me. I gestured around the opulent ballroom. This celebration cost, what, 200,000? The inefficiency I eliminated last quarter saved us twice that. But please, tell me more about embarrassment. The room had gone quiet now. Even the string quartet had stopped pretending to tune their instruments. You want to challenge the clause, I said, addressing the lawyers who had surrounded my father. Go ahead, spend millions on legal fees, drag the company through public litigation, expose every financial decision to discovery. I'm sure the shareholders will love learning how much we spend on country club memberships while cutting driver benefits. One of the lawyers whispered urgently in my father's ear. His face grew darker. Or, I continued, we can accept the reality. I'm the largest individual shareholder. I've earned it through documented, verified value creation, and starting Monday, I'll be taking my seat on the board of directors. The board has to vote on new members, another lawyer protested. Section 15.3 of the bylaws, I replied without missing a beat. Any shareholder with over 30% ownership has an automatic board seat, non-negotiable, non-votable. Again, Dad, you wrote these rules. You just never imagined they'd apply to me. My father stepped forward, pushing past his lawyers. You ungrateful. Careful, I warned. There are witnesses, and shareholders, and probably some reporters by now. Nothing draws media like drama at a country club gala. He stopped, fists clenched. I saw it then, the moment he truly understood. This wasn't a tantrum or a stunt. This was a coup, executed with the same precision he'd taught Logan to admire in business school case studies. Mr. Delaney, a voice called from the back. I recognized him, Mitchell Barnes, representing one of our institutional investors. Is it true that Miss Delaney saved the company $12 million in the Meridian lawsuit? That was a team effort, my father said automatically. Actually, Jim Morrison from legal stood up, looking uncomfortable. It was Claire. She found the clause that got us out of it. Spent 3 days straight in the archives. We presented it as a department win. And the Fuel Max contract, another investor asked, that's saving us what, $2 million a year? 2.4, I corrected. And that was just one of 18 contracts I've renegotiated in the last 5 years. The mood in the room was shifting. These weren't family friends anymore. They were stakeholders realizing that the person they'd dismissed as decoration had been protecting their investments. I have a proposal, I said, seizing the moment. We can spend the next 6 months fighting this in court, airing every piece of dirty laundry, watching our stock price tumble from the uncertainty, or we can move forward. What do you want? My father asked, the words seemingly torn from his throat. I want what I've earned, my board seat, an office on the executive floor, not because I need the status, but because I need access to make decisions quickly, and I want a full operational audit, conducted by an independent firm. Why an audit? Someone asked. Because I've been seeing inefficiencies from the ground level for 10 years. I know where we're bleeding money. I know which vanity projects are draining resources. I know which partnerships benefit individuals more than the company. I looked meaningfully at several board members who had the grace to look uncomfortable. It's time for transparency. This is extortion, my mother said, but her voice lacked conviction. This is business, I corrected. The same kind Dad's been conducting for 30 years. The only difference is I documented everything and read the fine print. Thomas Ashford stepped forward again. If I may address the legal concerns, Miss Delaney's position is unassailable. The clause is valid. The documentation is thorough. Any legal challenge would be lengthy, expensive, and likely futile. Speaking as someone with 40 years of corporate law experience, I'd advise accepting the new reality. My father looked around the room, perhaps hoping for support, but he'd built his empire on contracts and legal agreements. Everyone here understood that if you signed something, you were bound by it. His own principles had trapped him. Furthermore, I added, pulling out the last document from my envelope, I've prepared a preliminary transition plan. Logan keeps his 25% and his board position. He's earned his shot at leadership. Dad, you remain CEO for now, though the audit may recommend restructuring. The other board positions remain unchanged, pending the audit results.
For now, my father echoed.
I'm not here to destroy what you built, I said, softening my tone slightly. I'm here to make it better, to make it sustainable, to ensure that Delaney Holdings survives the next generation, not just the next quarter. I looked around the room, making eye contact with as many people as possible. We have 200 employees depending on us, thousands of clients trusting us. We can either be a family company that happens to run a business, or a business that happens to be run by a family. I know which one I'm choosing. The silence that followed was different from before, thoughtful rather than shocked. So, I concluded, setting down the microphone, enjoy the rest of your evening. Celebrate Logan's new position. He's going to need support as he learns the reality of what we actually do. And I'll see those of you on the board at Monday's emergency meeting. I stepped down from the podium and walked through the crowd. This time, people stepped aside consciously, some nodding, others just staring. As I passed the dessert table, I picked up one of the petit fours I'd been too nervous to eat earlier. It tasted like victory. The whispers started before I reached the exit, like ripples in a pond, spreading from group to group. The reality of what had just happened began to sink in. I heard fragments as I passed. 32%. Largest shareholder. She saved the Meridian deal. I thought that was Harrison's team. My warehouse manager mentioned her once, said she actually listens. The audit's going to be brutal. Near the coat check, Margaret Walsh intercepted me. Margaret was old Nashville money, her family predating even the country clubs they'd helped establish. She served on 3 corporate boards and had a reputation for seeing through bullshit with laser precision. That was quite a performance, she said, studying me with sharp eyes. It wasn't a performance, it was an announcement. She tilted her head. You know, I've been on the Delaney Holdings board for 6 years. Your father assured us the company was running at peak efficiency, but you're suggesting otherwise. I'm suggesting that peak efficiency depends on your vantage point. From the executive suite, everything looks smooth because people like me make sure it stays that way. From the operations floor, you see the waste, the redundancy, the small corruptions that compound over time. And you've been documenting these inefficiencies. Everyone? Margaret's smile was razor thin. Your father won't go quietly. He's already marshalling his forces. I know. I glanced back at the ballroom where heated discussions continued. But he taught me himself preparation beats panic every time. I've been preparing for 7 years. 7 years. She seemed to taste the words. You added that clause 7 years ago, knowing this day would come. I added that clause 7 years ago, hoping this day would never come, hoping that somewhere along the way, my contributions would be recognized, that I'd be given a seat at the table voluntarily. I shrugged. Hope isn't a business strategy. No, it isn't. Margaret pulled out her phone, typed something quickly. I'm calling an informal board caucus for tomorrow morning. Not official, Robert can't block it. Just a few concerned directors wanting to understand the situation better. Would you be available? Of course. Good. My office, 8 a.m. Bring your documentation. She paused. All of it. As Margaret walked away, my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. This is Patricia Vance. I need to speak with you. Tonight, please. Patricia Vance, the former chief legal counsel who'd signed off on Schedule J7. Interesting. I texted back Cafe Luna, 30 minutes. The valet had barely brought my Honda when I saw my mother approaching, wobbling slightly in her designer heels. For a moment, I considered driving off, but something in her expression made me wait. She opened the passenger door without asking, sliding in and filling my car with Chanel No. 5. Drive, she said quietly. Just drive. I pulled out, heading nowhere in particular. We sat in silence for several minutes, the Nashville skyline glittering around us. Did you know, she finally said, that I have an MBA? I nearly swerved. What? Vanderbilt? Graduated summa cum laude, 1987. She stared out the window. I was working at First Tennessee Bank when I met your father. Investment analysis. I was good at it.
I never knew that.
No, you wouldn't. By the time you were born, I was already playing the perfect corporate wife. The charity galas, the garden club, the appropriate enthusiasm for your father's every accomplishment. She laughed bitterly. Do you know what my colleagues called me, the glacier? Because I could freeze out a bad investment with one analysis. Why are you telling me this? Because I saw what you did tonight, the preparation, the timing, the execution, and I realized I've been watching you become everything I chose not to be. I pulled into a parking lot, needing to focus on this conversation. You could have had a career, I said carefully. I thought I was building something better, a family, a legacy. Your father was so driven, so ambitious. He needed someone to manage the home front while he conquered the business world. She turned to me, and in the dim light, I could see tears threatening her perfect makeup. I never meant to make you invisible, Claire. I was just so focused on Logan being everything your father wanted that I forgot to see what you were becoming on your own.
Mom.
No, let me finish. What you did tonight, it was brilliant, ruthless and brilliant, and She paused, struggling with the words. I'm proud of you, terrified for what this means for our family, but proud. It doesn't have to destroy the family, I said. It just has to change it. Your father doesn't do well with change, especially change he didn't orchestrate. Then he'll have to learn. We all will. She was quiet for a moment. Then, that audit you're calling for. You're going to find things that might hurt people I care about.
Yes.
But you're going to do it anyway.
Yes.
She nodded slowly. The glacier would have done the same thing. She opened the door, then paused. Your birthday is March 15th. You have a small scar on your left knee from when you fell off your bike trying to keep up with Logan. Your favorite color was purple until you decided that was too girly. So you switched to blue. Your first word was no. She smiled sadly. I've always seen you, Claire. I just didn't know how to show it. She left, calling an Uber instead of returning to the party. I sat in my car for a few minutes, processing. Then I headed to Cafe Luna. Patricia Vance was already there, hunched over a coffee in the back corner. She looked older than I remembered. Stress etched in lines around her eyes. Thank you for coming, she said as I sat down. You signed the document, having second thoughts. No, she wrapped her hands around her mug. I knew exactly what I was signing. I read Schedule J7 3 times. It was elegant, subtle, exactly the kind of provision that could lie dormant for years until the right conditions activated it. Then why did you sign it? Because I'd been watching you for 2 years at that point, seeing how you handled problems, how you treated people, how you actually understood the business from the ground up. She met my eyes. I signed it because I believed the company would be better with you in a position of power. You could have said something, warned my father. To what end he would have fired you, removed the clause, probably fired me for questioning him. She shook her head. No, the beauty of what you did was that it required patience, extraordinary patience. I wasn't sure you had it in you. 7 years' worth, apparently. Yes. She leaned forward. Claire, I need to tell you something. The reason I left the company, there are financial irregularities, nothing illegal, exactly, but deeply unethical. Board members steering contracts to their own companies, executives padding expenses, your father turning a blind eye because these people were his allies. I know, I've documented most of it. Her eyes widened. Of course you have. A laugh, short and sharp. Your audit is going to be devastating. It's going to be necessary. Yes. She pulled out a flash drive. My parting gift, emails, memos, documents I saved before I left, evidence that corroborates what you've probably already found. Use it wisely. I pocketed the drive. Why are you helping me? Because Delaney Holdings employs 200 people who deserve better than being collateral damage in rich men's games. Because your father built something valuable and is letting it rot from the inside. because you're the first person in 10 years who might actually fix it instead of just profiting from it." She stood to leave, then turned back. "Be careful. Claire, your father plays golf with judges. He has politicians on speed dial. He's not going to accept this quietly." "I know." "No, I don't think you do. Not fully. You've won the first battle, but the war is just beginning, and Robert Delaney doesn't lose wars." After she left, I sat in the cafe, nursing my own coffee and thinking. The flash drive felt heavy in my pocket, weighted with secrets. Tomorrow would bring lawyers and threats and the full force of my father's fury. But tonight, I'd stood in front of Nashville's elite and claimed what I'd earned. I'd made the invisible visible. I'd turned contracts into power. My phone buzzed. "Logan, just watched Dad throw a $40,000 vase. Mom's locked herself in the guest room. 3 board members have called emergency meetings. You really did it." I typed back, "This is just the beginning." "I know. That's what scares me." "Good. Fear keeps you sharp. See you at the board meeting." "Claire, for what it's worth, you deserved better, from all of us." I stared at the message for a long moment, then typed, "I know. That's why I took it." The war was indeed just beginning, but for the first time in my life, I was fighting it on my terms, with weapons I'd forged myself. The invisible daughter had become the majority shareholder. Now came the hard part, proving I deserved to be. The morning after the gala, I arrived at Margaret Walsh's office at 7:45 a.m., carrying 3 banker's boxes of documentation. Her building overlooked the Cumberland River, all glass and steel, a monument to new Nashville money, learning to dance with the old. "You're early," Margaret observed, opening the conference room door. "Good. We have much to discuss before the others arrive." I set down the boxes, my arms aching. 7 years of evidence was heavier than I'd anticipated. "Coffee," she offered, gesturing to a silver service that probably cost more than my monthly rent. "Please." As she poured, 3 other board members arrived. Harrison Clark, whose family owned the largest trucking fleet in the Southeast. Evelyn Moss, a former CFO who'd taken 3 companies public. And surprisingly, Daniel Kim, the newest and youngest board member, a tech entrepreneur my father had reluctantly added to appear forward-thinking. "Let's dispense with pleasantries," Harrison said, his accent thick as molasses. "Young lady, you've upset quite an apple cart." "I've claimed my legal stake in a company I've spent 10 years improving," I replied evenly. "If that upsets apple carts, perhaps they were poorly balanced to begin with." Evelyn laughed. "She has a point. Harrison, now, Miss Delaney." Claire, walk us through this documentation, slowly." For the next hour, I laid out 7 years of operational improvements, cost savings, and crisis aversions. Every folder meticulously organized, every claim supported by emails, contracts, and third-party verifications. Daniel Kim was the first to really engage. "This supplier consolidation in 2019 you're saying that saved $800,000 annually. $847,000, to be precise, and it improved delivery times by 13%. Why didn't we hear about this at board meetings?" I chose my words carefully. The savings were reported as part of overall operational improvements. The specifics of who drove those improvements, that information didn't make it to board level. Harrison's face darkened. "Are you suggesting your father deliberately—" "I'm suggesting that information flow in any large organization can be selective. Board presentations focus on big-picture strategies. The tactical executions that make those strategies possible often remain unattributed." Margaret had been quietly reviewing a particular folder. She looked up sharply. "This memo about the Williams contract. You're saying board member Richard Williams was steering business to his own logistics firm." "I'm saying that our rates with Williams Logistics were 30% above market standard, and that the decision to use them was made without a competitive bidding process. The documentation speaks for itself." The room fell silent. Richard Williams wasn't just a board member, he was my father's oldest friend, his college roommate, the best man at my parents' wedding. How many more instances like this? Evelyn asked quietly. 17 that I can definitively document. Estimated excess cost to the company $4.3 million over 5 years. Jesus Christ, Harrison muttered. To be clear, I added, I'm not alleging illegality. These arrangements were disclosed in footnotes of quarterly reports, but whether they represent the best interests of all shareholders. I let the implication hang. Daniel pulled out his laptop. I'm running some quick calculations. If your documented savings are accurate, and I have no reason to doubt them, given this evidence, then your contributions exceed $70 million. By the formula in Schedule J7. 32% is actually conservative, Evelyn finished. She could have justified asking for more. I only took what the formula dictated, I said. I'm not greedy, just fair. Margaret leaned back. Your father called me last night, 3 times. He's threatening to challenge the validity of Schedule J7, claiming you manipulated him into signing it. Did I hold a gun to his head? Threaten his family? Blackmail him? No. Then I failed to see the manipulation. I wrote a provision that would reward documented value creation. He chose not to read it. That's not manipulation, that's negligence. She's right, Daniel said. From a legal standpoint, this is ironclad. From a business standpoint, he gestured at the boxes. We'd be insane not to want someone with this level of operational knowledge on the board. The question, Evelyn said slowly, is what happens now. Robert Delaney isn't going to simply accept this, and a protracted battle could hurt the company. Which is why I proposed a transition plan, I said, pulling out another folder. My father remains CEO. Logan takes an operational role to actually learn the business. I join the board and oversee the audit. We present it as a planned succession, a strengthening of family commitment to the company. And if Robert refuses, then we have a very public fight that reveals these inefficiencies, these insider deals, these systemic problems to every competitor, every client, and every employee. I met each of their eyes. I don't want to destroy my father. I want to save his company, but I'll do the former if it's the only way to achieve the latter. Harrison whistled low. You've got steel in you, girl. I've got 10 years of watching this company's potential being squandered. Steel is what formed under that pressure. Margaret stood. I need to speak with Claire privately. We'll reconvene in 20 minutes. After the others left, Margaret poured herself more coffee, her movements deliberate. You know they're going to vote to support you, she said. I suspected. Not because they like you, not even because they respect you, though after this morning, they do. They're supporting you because you represent something they've wanted for years, a check on Robert Delaney's power. I know. Do you really understand what you're walking into? Board politics make family dynamics look simple. These people will use you to wound your father, then discard you the moment you're no longer useful. I met her steady gaze. Mrs. Walsh, I've been invisible my entire life. I've watched from the shadows as people played their games, made their alliances, broke their promises. I know exactly what I'm walking into. And you're prepared for it. I've been preparing for 7 years. The only difference now is that I have a seat at the table. She studied me for a long moment. Your mother was brilliant, before she chose your father. We were at Vanderbilt together. She could have run any company in Nashville. She mentioned that last night. Did she also mention that she's the one who introduced me to your father? That she essentially orchestrated his early career, introducing him to the right people, positioning him for success? I felt something cold slide down my spine. No. The invisible women in the Delaney family have always been the most dangerous. Your father just forgot that. Margaret smiled. And it wasn't entirely friendly. Don't make the same mistake. When the others returned, the vote was unanimous. The board would support my claim, pending legal review. They would also support the independent audit, though Harrison grumbled about airing dirty laundry. As we wrapped up, Daniel lingered. That provision you wrote, Schedule J7, were you the only one who qualified? I thought about the other invisible employees. The ones who kept Delaney Holdings running while executives took credit. Read the full document. The mechanism exists for anyone who can document their contributions. His eyes widened. You didn't just protect yourself. You created a pathway for anyone whose work has been systematically undervalued. Yes. That's revolutionary. That's fair. I left Margaret's office with commitments from 4 board members and a clear path forward. But as I waited for the elevator, my phone rang. My father. "Congratulations," he said, his voice deadly calm. "You've convinced a few board members, but this isn't over."
I know.
"You have no idea what you've started. The connections I have, the favors I can call in." "Dad," I interrupted, "I have 7 years of documentation. Every inflated contract, every kickback disguised as a consulting fee, every board member who's been treating Delaney Holdings like their personal piggy bank. Do you really want to escalate this?" Silence. "I thought we could build something together," he said finally, and for the first time in my life, I heard age in his voice. "You, me, Logan, a family legacy. We can, just not on the old terms. Not with me as the invisible daughter grateful for scraps." "You were never invisible to me, Claire." "Name one project I led, one initiative I championed, one success that was attributed to me." More silence. "I'll see you at the board meeting," I said. "We can fight and both lose, or we can build something better. Your choice." I hung up without waiting for a response. The war wasn't over, but I'd won the first crucial battle: legitimacy. The board saw me now. The company would see me Monday. And my father. He was beginning to understand that the daughter he'd overlooked hadn't just been watching all these years. She'd been planning. Monday morning arrived with a thunderstorm that seemed orchestrated for drama. I stood in the Delaney Holdings lobby at 7 a.m., watching rain streak down the glass walls. The building bore my family's name, but I'd never felt ownership of it until now. Miss Delaney. I turned to find James Peterson, the security chief who'd worked here for 15 years. He was holding an executive elevator key card. "Mr. Peterson. This came down from the board this morning. Your new access." He handed me the card, then paused. "My daughter works in accounts receivable. Says you're the only executive who ever remembered her name. Just wanted you to know a lot of us down here are glad about what happened." Before I could respond, he walked away. But as I crossed the lobby, I noticed something different. The staff people who normally kept their eyes down when family members passed were watching me. The receptionist nodded. The mail clerk gave a small thumbs up, the invisible employees recognizing one of their own who'd made it. The executive elevator was a different world. Mahogany panels, soft jazz, the subtle scent of expensive air freshener. As it climbed toward the boardroom on the 20th floor, I thought about all the times I'd taken the service elevator, hauling boxes of contracts nobody else wanted to review. The boardroom doors were already open. Inside, the scene was set for corporate theater. My father sat at the head of the table, flanked by his lawyers. Logan was to his right, looking uncomfortable in his new reality. The board members were arranged carefully, allies and enemies mapping themselves through seating choices. And at the far end, a court reporter. They were making this official. "Claire," my father said, his tone professionally neutral. "Please, sit." I took a seat directly opposite him, the length of the table between us like a battlefield. "Before we begin," Harrison Clark said, "I move that we acknowledge Claire Delaney's 32% ownership stake and her automatic board position as per Section 15.3 of the corporate bylaws." "Seconded," Evelyn Moss added quickly. "Any objections?" Margaret Walsh asked, her eyes on my father. His lawyers whispered urgently, but he waved them off. "No objections. Let the record show Claire Delaney is now a board member of Delaney Holdings." It was a tactical retreat, not a surrender. I could see it in his eyes. "Now then," my father continued, "regarding this proposed audit—" "It's not proposed," I interrupted. "As a shareholder with over 30% ownership, I have the unilateral right to call for an operational audit. Section 22.7 of the bylaws. The audit begins today." Today? Richard Williams sputtered. He was sweating despite the air conditioning. That's hardly enough time to prepare. Prepare what exactly? I asked innocently. The book should already be in order, unless there's something you need to adjust. How dare you imply? I'm not implying anything. I'm stating that PricewaterhouseCoopers will begin their audit this morning. They'll need access to all financial records, contracts, and correspondence for the past 7 years. My father's face had gone from red to pale. 7 years. That's when the operational improvements began. We need to establish a baseline for comparison. I pulled out a folder. I've already provided them with preliminary documentation. They're particularly interested in our vendor selection processes. Richard Williams stood abruptly. I need to make a call. Sit down, Richard, my father said quietly. You're not going anywhere. The tension in the room was electric. This was the moment either my father would fight, risking exposure of every questionable deal, or he'd adapt to the new reality. What do you want, Claire? He asked finally. Really want? I want Delaney Holdings to reach its potential. I want our employees to be proud of where they work. I want our clients to trust us because we've earned it, not because we're the only option. I leaned forward. And I want the Delaney name to mean something more than old Nashville connections and backroom deals. You want to destroy everything I built. No, I want to save it from destroying itself. Logan spoke for the first time. The numbers Claire showed me. Dad, we've been bleeding money on these insider contracts. If we continue... You too. My father turned on him. You're taking her side. I'm taking the company's side, Logan said quietly. Maybe it's time we all did. The room fell silent except for the rain hammering against the windows. Mr. Delaney, a new voice said from the doorway. Thomas Ashford entered, followed by 2 senior partners from his firm and 3 representatives from PwC. We're ready to begin the audit. We'll need access to the records room and all executive files. My father looked around the table, perhaps searching for support, but Harrison was studying his hands. Evelyn was reviewing documents. Margaret watched with the detached interest of someone enjoying a chess match. Daniel Kim was typing notes on his laptop. Even Richard Williams had deflated. Resignation replacing rage. Fine, my father said, but I want it on record that this audit is being conducted under protest. Noted, Thomas replied smoothly. Now, about that access. As security badges were arranged and passwords shared, I noticed movement in my peripheral vision. Staff members were gathering outside the glass walls of the boardroom. Accounting clerks, IT specialists, HR representatives. Word had spread. The invisible employees were watching to see what would happen next. There's one more matter, I said as the auditors prepared to leave. Effective immediately, I'm proposing a new employee equity participation program based on documented value creation. What? Several board members spoke at once. I pulled out another folder. Similar to Schedule J7, but for non-family employees. Anyone who can demonstrate significant cost savings or revenue generation receives equity participation. It's time we rewarded the people who actually make this company run. That could be expensive, Harrison said, but he sounded intrigued rather than opposed. Less expensive than continuing to lose our best operational talent to competitors who value them properly, I countered. Daniel, you understand tech companies. Tell them about retention costs. Daniel nodded. The average cost to replace a skilled employee is 150% of their annual salary. If equity participation reduces turnover by even 20%, the math works, Evelyn finished. It actually saves money long term. I need time to review this, my father said. Of course, we'll vote on it next month, after the initial audit results. I smiled. I'm sure those results will provide context for why such a program is necessary. Logan was staring at me with something like awe. You're restructuring the entire company culture. I'm aligning incentives with outcomes. The people who create value should share in it. Revolutionary concept, I know. This is still my company, my father said, but it sounded more like a question than a statement. It's our company, I corrected. Yours, mine, Logan's, the shareholders, the employees. That's what I'm trying to make you understand. The age of the Imperial CEO is over. Collaboration isn't weakness, it's survival. Margaret Walsh cleared her throat. I move to adjourn this meeting. We'll reconvene when the preliminary audit results are available. Seconded, Harrison said quickly. As the meeting broke up, my father remained seated, looking older than his 63 years. I stayed too, letting the others file out. You know, he said when we were alone, I was proud that night. When I announced Logan's promotion, I thought I was securing the family legacy. You were just not the way you planned. I built this company from nothing, 20 trucks and a loan I couldn't afford. I know, and what you built was amazing. But somewhere along the way, you stopped building and started protecting. Protecting your position, your pride, your way of doing things. That's when the rot started. He looked at me then, really looked at me, perhaps for the first time in years. You think you can do better. I think we can do better, together, if you're willing to let go of some control. And if I'm not, then you'll fight a war against your own daughter, your own board, and eventually your own legacy. Even if you win, you'll lose. He was quiet for a long moment. Outside, the storm was breaking, sunlight starting to pierce the clouds. Your mother says you have an apartment in East Nashville. The change of subject surprised me. Yes. I drove through there once, looking for you after Friday night. Couldn't bring myself to knock. He stood, straightening his tie. Maybe I could visit sometime, see how my invisible daughter lives. It was the closest to an apology I'd ever get from Robert Delaney.
I'd like that, I said.
He nodded and left, his footsteps echoing in the hallway. I sat alone in the boardroom where so many decisions had been made without me, where my contributions had been erased from corporate memory. But that was changing now. The audit would reveal the truth. The new equity program would reward it, and slowly, painfully, the culture would shift. My phone buzzed, a text from Logan. You know you just declared war on 50 years of corporate tradition, right? I typed back, someone had to. Might as well be the invisible daughter with nothing to lose. Not invisible anymore. No, I agreed, looking out at the city my family had helped build. Not anymore. The real work was just beginning, but for the first time in my life, I had the power to do it. The audit results came back 3 weeks later. On another rainy Tuesday morning, I was in my new office 20th floor. Corner view. The executive suite I'd never imagined entering when Thomas Ashford delivered the preliminary report. It's worse than you documented, he said simply, setting the bound report on my desk. But also better, in a strange way. I flipped through the pages, seeing numbers that confirmed what I'd suspected. The inefficiencies totaled $12 million annually. 13.7. But here's the interesting part. Your interventions over the past 7 years prevented losses that would have totaled over $90 million. The company would have been bankrupt without you. I let that sink in. All those invisible hours, all those thankless fixes, they hadn't just improved things. They'd saved everything. Your father wants to see you, Thomas added. He's in the boardroom with Logan. I found them there, my father standing at the window where he'd once commanded his empire. Logan seated at the table with his own copy of the report. $90 million, my father said without turning around. You saved us $90 million. The company saved itself. I just helped guide it. He laughed, short and bitter. Still trying to be invisible, even now. Old habits. Logan looked up from the report. Some of these contracts, Richard Williams was taking us for 30% above market rate, for 15 years. He submitted his resignation, my father said. Effective immediately. 3 other board members as well. The old guard falling away, making room for something new. I've been thinking, my father continued, finally turning to face me, about succession, about legacy, about what it means to build something that lasts. I waited. I'm announcing my retirement, he said. Not immediately over the next 18 months. Logan will take over as CEO, but only after he completes a full rotation through operations, learning the actual business, not just the theory. Logan nodded. Claire's already set up my schedule. 6 months in logistics, 3 in contracts, 3 in vendor relations.
And you? I asked my father.
Chairman Emeritus. Advisory role only. He met my eyes. You'll be chairman of the board. The audit made it clear you understand this company better than anyone. I hadn't expected this, Dad. It's not a gift, he said quickly. It's an acknowledgement. You've already been running this company from the shadows. Time to step into the light. We stood there, 3 Delaney's in a boardroom that had seen so much family drama, and for the first time, it felt like we were actually a team. There's something else, Logan said. The employee equity program you proposed. We ran the numbers. If we'd had it in place 7 years ago, we would have retained 6 key operational managers who went to competitors. The knowledge loss alone cost us millions. So we implemented, my father said. Retroactively where possible. It's only fair. Fair, from Robert Delaney's mouth. The word sounded foreign but sincere. My phone buzzed. An email from Janet in HR. The announcement just went out. You should see the operations floor. We took the elevator down, all 3 of us, together. When the doors opened on the 3rd floor, the sight took my breath away. They were applauding. Every cubicle, every desk, every corner of the operations floor, people were on their feet, clapping, not the polite golf clap of country club galas, but real appreciation from people who'd been invisible too long. Thank you, someone called out, then another. Then it became a chant. Thank you, Claire. Thank you, Claire. I felt tears prick my eyes. These were my people, the ones who'd made the company run while others took credit, the ones who'd stayed late, solved problems, saved money, and never asked for recognition, just like me. Speech, someone shouted. I stepped forward, my family behind me for once instead of ahead. No speeches, I said, my voice carrying across the floor. We've had enough of those. How about we just get to work together, visible, valued, all of us? The applause swelled again, and this time my father and Logan joined in. 6 months later, I stood in the same ballroom where everything had changed. Another gala, another gathering of Nashville's elite. But this time, I was the one at the microphone. Delaney Holdings has had its best quarter in company history, I announced. Not because of grand strategies or brilliant leadership, but because we finally started valuing the people who make those strategies work. I looked out at the crowd, many familiar faces. Some new. The old board members who'd resigned had been replaced by people who understood that business was changing. Richard Williams was notably absent, his various schemes having finally caught up with him. Our employee equity program has resulted in 37 operational improvements in just 6 months. Turnover is down 40%. Profit margins are up 18%. And every single employee now has a stake in our success. My mother sat at the family table, wearing the same designer dress, but with a different expression, pride. Genuine and undisguised. She'd started teaching part-time at Vanderbilt's business school, her MBA finally put to use. But tonight isn't about numbers, I continued. It's about transformation. It's about what happens when invisible contributions become visible, when steady hands are finally recognized, when merit matters more than connections. Logan caught my eye from his table with the operations managers, his new peer group, as he learned the business from the ground up. He raised his glass in a small salute. So here's to the next chapter of Delaney Holdings, built on transparency, equity, and the radical idea that everyone who creates value should share in it. The room erupted in applause, genuine, enthusiastic, nothing like the polite acknowledgement from that night when I'd been offered a spa weekend. As I stepped down from the podium, Thomas Ashford approached with a familiar-looking envelope. "What's this?" I asked. "Open it." Inside was a single document, Schedule J7, the provision that had changed everything, but stamped across it in red ink, "Void superseded by Comprehensive Equity Participation Program." You don't need it anymore, Thomas said. You've built something better. He was right. The secret clause that had protected me was now obsolete because the entire company operated on its principles. Value creation was rewarded. Contributions were recognized. The invisible were seen. My father approached, looking younger somehow despite the months that had passed. You know, he said, I've been thinking about that night, when I gave Logan 25% and you a spa weekend. Ancient history. No, let me finish. It was the best thing that could have happened, not because it was right, but because it was so wrong it forced everything into the open. He paused. I'm sorry it took that to see you. Claire, really see you.
I know.
Your office, I noticed you kept that spa voucher, framed on your wall. I smiled. A reminder of where I came from, of why the work matters. And you never used it. Never needed to. Turns out, being visible is all the reward I needed. We stood there, father and daughter, no longer invisible to each other. Around us, the party continued, employees mixing with executives, operations staff chatting with board members, the hierarchies that had once defined Delaney Holdings slowly dissolving into something better. Claire. Logan appeared with a tablet. The weekly operations report. Thought you'd want to see, we just landed the Morrison contract. Janet from procurement led the negotiation. Saved us $800,000 annually. Promote her, I said immediately, and make sure it's announced company-wide. No more invisible victories. As the evening wound down, I found myself back where it all started, standing by a marble column, holding a glass of champagne. But everything else had changed. The shadows that once hid me now held conversations, deals, and connections. The spotlight that had once exposed me now illuminated a transformed company. My phone buzzed. An email from an unknown address with the subject line, "Thank you. Ms. Delaney, I'm a contracts manager at Pearson Logistics. I heard about your employee equity program. I've been invisible at my company for 12 years. Your story gave me the courage to document my contributions. I'm meeting with our board next week. Thank you for showing us it's possible. Another invisible daughter." I smiled, raising my glass to possibilities, to transformations, to all the invisible daughters and sons who keep the world running while others take the credit. Schedule J7 had been my protection, my secret weapon, but the real power had never been in the clause itself. It had been in the patience to wait, the diligence to document, and the courage to finally stand up and say, I've been here all along, now see me. The invisible daughter had become the chairman of the board, but more importantly, she'd made sure no one else had to be invisible again. At least, not at Delaney Holdings. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to hear where you're tuning in from. Please share in the comments below, so we can connect and discuss what you thought about Claire's journey. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the like button. And if you really want to help more people discover this tale of the invisible daughter who refused to disappear, please hit that hype button. Your support means everything.